Before we get into everything today, I need to give a little bit of a spoiler warning because I want to talk about one of my favorite movies from when I was younger that I still love to watch with my kids today. And so if you haven't seen it in the last, 25 or so years, then just be warned that there's going to be some information about the movie that you may not know. And the movie I'm talking about is Toy Story. The first Pixar movie, the first truly computer-generated animated movie. And in it, we get introduced to a character by the name of Buzz Lightyear. Now, Buzz is one of my favorite characters in the movie, and what I love about him in the first one is that he doesn't realize who he is. He comes out of the box and he believes that he really is a space ranger on another planet where there's giants that pick him up and move him around and other people that look differently and dogs that talk and all these kinds of things, and he believes he's on a mission to defeat the Emperor Zurg. And so he spends the whole movie trying to fulfill this mission, to get back into space, to fix his spacecraft, to do all of these things, while Woody, who is kind of the head of the toys in Andy's room, keeps trying to convince him that he's living in an alternate reality. And the truth that he says over and over and over again to him, sometimes condescendingly, sometimes compassionately, is this: you are a toy. And nothing in his life is going to make sense until he figures that part out. Because when you're a toy, there are certain things that come with it. Like being played with a child. Like having your purpose be to be for that kid and not for some crazy mission. Like knowing that your parts can pop off and you might have to put them back on again. All of these things only happen if you quit living in this alternate reality and realize that these are the characteristics that come with being who you are when you are a toy. And there are some times when I feel like I need to go up to people and kind of do the same thing to them. They're living in some alternate reality and I have to come up and kind of grab them by the shoulders and hold on to them and with all of the compassion that I can muster say, you are a human being. So there are some things that you need to start acting like. And there's some things you've got to realize that apply to you simply out of the fact that you are human. Like it or not, this is your reality. And one of the things that all humans have to deal with, whether we like it or not, because we are a human being, is that we have to relate to other humans. There's no way around it. And we often relate to other people out of our brokenness because we have needs. And there's something that I need. I mean, we have a whole hierarchy you can learn about in school if you go, called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all these different ones. And what we try to do is we try to find other people to help us meet our needs. And we love when other people do that. We love when other people give us what we need to eat or to feel important or to have shelter or whatever it is, to feel desired. We're not so keen on it when other people do that to us. And they just take what we have to meet the needs that they have. Because here's what we tend to do. We tend to treat the relationships we are in like relational transactions. And we're trying to get the most we can from somebody else while costing the least amount from us. I see this all the time when it comes to dating relationships. I see this all the time when it comes to how people treat their friends even. I need as much as I can get from you, but I want it to cost the least for me. And the reason we do that is because the people that we're relating to, the people that we're having these transactions with, we don't see them as valuable in and of themselves. They are only valuable in what we can get from them. They are a means to my ends. Whether my ends is building a business, getting elected, feeling important, or just simply feeding my kids. The other person doesn't matter except for what I can get from them. And we know we play with that a little bit. There are some things that I like this person, they make me laugh, they do this, they do that. But really, so much of what we do when we're interacting out of this brokenness is, what can I get out of this for me? And when I don't get what I need, then I don't really care. When something's used up, then I move on like I would go to the next gas can if it was empty to fill up a lawnmower. And what usually happens is when somebody is no longer giving us what we need, then they become an annoyance. And we'd rather ignore them. Have you ever been ghosted before? Or we get rid of them. And usually how we get rid of the people that annoy us, we yell at them, we put them down, we treat them poorly, we try and push them away. Because I don't want to have to deal with this other person. I don't have to relate to this other person if I'm not getting what I need out of them. We forget we are human beings. And we are created to be in relationships. You see, how we relate to other people is incredibly, incredibly important to Jesus. When you're looking at marching orders of what he gave to his followers, of which hopefully you are, I know I am, and when we're talking about what it means to follow Jesus, how we treat other people, how we relate to other people is really, really near the top of the list. It's like 1B on the list of priorities. And there's one that has become part of popular culture that we throw it out and we use, and I don't think we necessarily use it well, but we use it all the same. And this is the golden rule. It's from Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Jesus is speaking here, and he says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." But if you're going to use that passage right, because a lot of times we use that to just say, hey, treat me like I like. We don't always remember the doing to others. We like the having them do unto us part. But if you really want to get a handle on that, you have to look at the context, because to be honest, that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me sometimes. Like if someone is attacking me, taking advantage of me, putting me down, bullying me, trying to do all of these things to get their needs met, what am I supposed to do back? How am I supposed to treat them like I hope they'll treat me when I feel like I'm getting taken advantage of? Well, you have to understand where he's saying this. He's speaking on the hillside. He's gathered thousands of people to come and hear them. And the people that are gathered there that day to hear him speak are working poor mostly. All of them are needy. All of them are discouraged. All of them are longing for someone to give them hope. And he tells them a bunch of specific things to do. And one of the things he starts with in this section that we're on right here, right before he tells them to do unto others what you would have them do to you, he starts talking to them about how they're supposed to relate with God. He says, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened." But why in the world would we be motivated to ask and seek and knock to a God who has placed us in this world where we seem to be struggling? So he says, "Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" In other words, the God that you ask and seek and knock of is a good God. He is a good Father. He is better than any earthly father you have ever known, and he will meet needs in ways that give life and not harm. He won't give you something that has no purpose. He will always give you something that matters, and he won't do something that harms you, but something that will give you a hope and a future. And because of this, you can trust Him. And because you have this God, you can ask and He will answer. Seek and you will find. Then your life isn't going to be one of scarcity and need. You'll have Him to give you what you need. So you don't have to treat people as a means to an end anymore. They're not there just to fill some void in you. And so because that's who He is, and because that's what He does, then in everything you can do unto others what you would have them do unto you. You can treat them with genuine concern. You can value them for who they are, even in their brokenness. And that love that you show them reflects the love that God has shown you. And by the way, it sums up all of the law and the prophets, which, in case you didn't know, is all of this right here. If you were to take all of this right here and summarize it, it would be do to others what you would have them do to you. It's a big deal how we relate to other people. But what does doing to others look like? What does doing to them what you would have them do to you? How does that work itself out in real life, in the ways that we live and the interactions that we have? Well, there's some ways that this gets fleshed out later in Scripture. When Paul is talking about families, which is our closest relationships that we have, probably be pretty important to figure out how to have those work well. In Ephesians 5, chapter 21, he says this: submit to one another. And we don't like that word submit, but if we're going to navigate life together well in the relationships that are closest to us, then instead of always wondering what's in this for me, we need to be asking, as Andy Stanley says, what can I do to help? This is a different improvement method than we typically try and use, because most of the time when we're trying to get something better, we use these tactics instead, like nagging. I see the trash isn't taken out yet. See that bed still isn't made. I see you still haven't bought me flowers for our anniversary that was 3 months ago. We like to lecture. We'll sit them down and we'll list out the PowerPoint slides of all the reasons that they've screwed up. All the reasons that we have to attach blame to them in this situation. Or we'll simply ignore them. Cold shoulders. You ask them what's going on and they say, I'm fine, but they're not talking to you anymore. They're not doing anything for you anymore. I've told this before in our family. For Megan and I, especially when we were first married, if we were having a rough day with each other, that meant that I could guarantee to learn about it when I went to brush my teeth, because there wasn't toothpaste on my toothbrush. But if there was toothpaste on the toothbrush, then I knew we were going to be able to work things out. So how do you like it, though, when people do these things to you? When they nag you and lecture you and ignore you, you probably don't like it. So if you're going to do to others what you would have them do to you, you have to treat them like you wish to be treated, which means you have to ask, what can I do to help? What can you contribute comes first before what do you get out of it. And you can do this because the needs for your life are covered by your good Father who gives you what you need when you ask and you seek and you knock. So you can put aside the claim that you have to put on something, like the leftovers in the fridge. And you can do this because of the second part that Paul says in that verse, Ephesians 5:21. He says, submit to one another. Why? Or how? You do it out of reverence for Christ. So you're submitting and asking, how can I help, isn't based on if the person deserves help or not. It's not based on whether they've done something for you or they're a really good person or they seem to have made a lot of good choices and now they're in a bad spot. You help not because they deserve it, but because you are served first. Because of what Christ has done for you, you are able to give to others. When he came to you when you deserved nothing and gave you everything, so now you can go to those who seem to deserve nothing and offer them what Christ has given you as well. Because seeing our broken relationship with God, instead of saying they don't deserve it, they've got nothing to offer me, he said, what can I do to help? And he willingly made a way for us to come to know him. Another thing you can do, besides asking what I can do to help, is you can breathe deep and you can slow down. James 1, 19 and 20, and by the way, James was Jesus' brother, earthly brother. And he gets out at the very beginning of James chapter 1, and he starts to talk again about these gifts that come from God. And he says, look, because of these gifts that God has given us, we can do these things. Verse 19 and 20 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God requires. One of the things I hate about interacting with people is when people don't understand something and they jump to the worst without checking on what's going on. Their assumptions and their conclusions always go to the negative side. And so they never check when they don't quite understand to see if what they think is true and accurate or not. Or what about when people ignore you? Or what about when you're in a conversation with somebody and you know they're not hearing anything you're saying to try and feel what you feel or think what you think? They are only listening in order to plan their next response, the next rebuttal, the next attack that they've got against what you're saying. None of us like this. And yet this is the most common way we deal with conflict. This is the most common way we deal with things when we get in arguments with each other. There was one time I was doing a counseling session with a couple that were really in a heated place, and they were sitting down. They were probably 30 feet apart, but you could still feel the tension in the room. And when I asked why they had come to see me, it became grenades being lobbed back and forth. And I said, okay, we're not going to keep doing this. And so I sat them down separately and I said, look, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to the other person and not say anything. And then when they're done talking, I want you to repeat back what you heard them say. And it took us the rest of an hour for them to be able to learn to do that without attaching blame, without adding in attacks, without moving past what was said to what they thought was unsaid. Because this just tends to be what we do. The issue, though, is if God is really meeting our needs, if we really have all of these gifts from Him and our needs are met, we're not looking at this other person to get something from them. The goal isn't to win. The goal isn't to conquer territory. The goal is to solve the problem and to do it together. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you're willing to slow down and to listen and to not become angry so easily. One of the greatest examples that Jesus tells of how to treat other people is a parable in Matthew chapter 22. We call it the Good Samaritan parable. And it's a parable about getting outside of where you're comfortable. If you want to treat others how you want to be treated, you're going to have to be willing to get uncomfortable. There was a man who was traveling down a road known for bandits, but it was always well traveled, and he got attacked and he was beaten and stripped and robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. And two very prominent religious people came by and saw the man sitting there, but because dealing with him was going to mess up their plans, some of which they had planned for weeks and months in advance and prepared for, he was going to stop all that. He was an incredible inconvenience. he was going to ruin huge plans. And so because of that, they left him there until a Samaritan showed up. Now you have to realize the Samaritan, to the people Jesus was talking to, is the worst type of person that you could think of. Like, there is nothing good in a Samaritan. And yet this was the man who saw the person on the side of the road and stopped what he was doing. And he cleaned him up as best he could. He placed him on his donkey. He carried him into town and he put him up in a room. And he said to the guy, here's some money. Cover all of his expenses, whatever he needs till he heals. I'll come back later, and if it was more than what I gave you, I'll pay the rest. Just please take care of this man. And it probably cost him at least a day of travel wherever he was going, whatever business he was on, plus all of the time and blood and money that he gave. But he was willing to get uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but most of my days, there's like no margin, right? There's just so much going on that if there's somebody who is in need that I see, I don't like it. But a lot of times instead of feeling, oh, I feel so bad for you, I need to do something, which is compassion, being moved to respond, I feel annoyed. Like, oh, this is going to ruin my plans. I had all these things laid out. I've got to get this done. My boss is going to be so angry if I don't get this turned in. Oh, I've got things to do for the kids. We've got to run here and there and there. How am I supposed to stop and help this person? How in the world can I help? I have got nothing to give. Well, really, it's just because I've given it all away already to these things. Because I have so much to do. But what if I was the one laying on the side of the road? Wouldn't I hope that somebody would stop for me? You see, if you're really going to love your neighbor, if you're going to do to them what you'd have them do to you, you are going to deal with detours and distractions because the other person matters. Not because what they can give you, but because of who they are and how God sees them. So how do you do that? How do you get uncomfortable? Well, maybe you need to start getting to know the people that you rub shoulders with and pray for them. And pray for them effectively because you know what to pray for because you've gotten to know them. Maybe you need to give something away. Because instead of always thinking you don't have enough, you have to realize that God will meet your needs. And the cool thing about this is that when Jesus demonstrated what it meant to give things away, he gave people what they needed, but it was always different. Sometimes they needed advice or teaching. Sometimes they needed healing. Sometimes they literally needed life restored to them. Sometimes they needed food to eat or water to drink. And so the ways that you can give are as endless as the needs around you. So there is something that you can do. You can make a meal and show up at someone's house with it. You can babysit for a couple that hasn't spent time together in far too long. You can give up some of your time to make a phone call to someone who you know is lonely. You can rake leaves for a family that just doesn't have the ability to do it anymore. And in each and everything you do, every time you give that way, you also give Jesus. You see, when we live as human beings who truly want to follow the way of Jesus, when we want to relate to others how he's called us to, in selflessness and in love, divine moments will happen. You never know when something will just open up before you. And Jesus will step through in the midst of it. So is there a relationship that you need to apply this kind of living to right now? It might be too hard to try and do all of your relationships all at once this way, but is there one where you can ask, what can I do to help? Where you can be quick to listen instead of speaking, and where you're willing to get uncomfortable for the sake of someone else. You can do this if you know there is a God who is going to meet your needs so the person doesn't have to. What is one way you can move with Jesus this week? that is going to shape how you relate to us. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be people who show your love and your grace in the relationships that we have. Help us to know where our needs are truly met, and help us to live out a way of life that is so attractive because you have made it abundant, not with things or money, but with life, that others will come and wonder what it is that we have, and we can give them you. We pray these things in your name. Amen.